Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. Today's another AMA episode, that is Ask Me Anything. I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Send your questions to Victor at victorjm.com. That's Victor at victorjm.com. Well, today's question comes from Paul, who writes, I've booked a strong capital gain as a passive investor in a syndication. The sponsor of the deal is asking all investors to come along for the ride in a 1031 exchange. The sponsor seemed to do a good job on this first project. However, the proposed replacement property is in Houston, and I don't have a good feeling about the fundamentals of this replacement property. What would you advise in my situation? Well, Paul, this is a fantastic question. I frequently see situations where a seller is enticed by an attractive sale price for a good performing asset. But of course, a sale is a taxable event. Unless you know that you have a replacement property that meets your criteria to replace the original in a tax-sheltered manner within the statutory limits, you might be better off paying the tax. There's a well-known tax advisor out there who often counsels investors to never let the tax tail wag the investment dog. The replacement property had better be every bit as good as the property you just sold. It's almost like dissolving a good marriage and trading down for a bad marriage. When you state it in terms of a romantic relationship, it sounds ridiculous, and yet I see people make this exact decision in the world of investing. A case in point is a property that belonged to a friend of mine who made a substantial investment in a multifamily apartment complex in Florida. That property was sold at a handsome profit. Investors doubled their original investment in only a few years. The replacement property needed to be identified within 45 days of the sale in order to meet the statutory deadlines under the regulations for 1031. So you've got 45 days to put together a list of potential replacement properties, and then you've got 180 days from the original sale to close on a replacement property. I'm guessing that their first choice, originally identified as a replacement, turned out not to be viable, so the team switched gears and focused on their plan B, which was coincidentally a property in Houston, Texas. That particular property was located within a radius of George Bush International Airport, and it was directly in line with one of the runways. Residents who live there can experience aviation traffic overhead every single day. In my mind, that makes the property undesirable, and no amount of upgrading of kitchens or installing amenities is going to eliminate that undesirable quality. I've personally driven through the area, and I have to tell you, because of that, it's a rough area. Now I'm hearing from my friend that the building was purchased with bridge debt and they're facing higher interest costs for permanent financing. The investors are facing a substantial capital call in order to maintain that property. And unless they're able to raise a significant amount of new money, they face the possibility of possibly losing the property altogether. That's an example of a property that was a downgrade compared with the original investment. Now, in your question, you referenced that your replacement property is also coincidentally in Houston. Houston can be a difficult market, and you'd really need to do your due diligence. Property taxes in Houston are high. They're among the highest in the country, and you could be facing a bit of sticker shock on the property taxes. Houston's also an area where insurance prices have skyrocketed, so you really need to do your due diligence. Another pitfall that's rarely talked about is the tax treatment of the new property. When you complete a 1031 exchange, the basis of the new property is carried over from the old property, and that means that the depreciation benefits on the new property will be based on the original purchase price of the old property. So as a result, you might face a higher tax liability in the future when you decide to sell the property without using another 1031 exchange. To add to that, you might also face depreciation recapture. If you sell the new property at a later date without doing another 1031 exchange, any depreciation taken on the old property might be subject to depreciation recapture. And depreciation recapture is taxed at a higher rate. It's taxed as ordinary income rather than the lower capital gains rate. So it's important to consider the potential impact of depreciation recapture on the overall tax liability. Now, let's be clear, I'm not an accountant and I'm not here to give you or anyone else tax advice. I'm just here to say that in many cases, you want to have an already identified replacement property that you've got a high degree of confidence is going to be better than the original. The problem with being a limited partner in these deals is you don't get to perform the same due diligence on the replacement property as you did when you made the original investment. Because when you made the original investment, you had a wide open field of choices. You were not up against a 45-day deadline to make an investment decision with a very limited set of choices. And I've seen investors get stuck in situations because they were dragged along with the group of investors as part of a replacement property. If the replacement property is an inferior investment, or if you run into one of the pitfalls I mentioned, you might have been better off just paying the tax, taking your profits, and remaining in control of your investment capital. I want to thank you, Paul, for a fantastic question. And for the listeners at home, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.